here, and we're recording, so you can start the show. I, uh, I got stuff to talk about, as you kind of saw. I put a
Y-
bunch of stuff out yesterday.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to get a kind of a preview of that
There,
before I dive into the videos.
yeah, there's some yeah, we need to. I need you to kind of ground truth me on some things too. I mean,
Love it.
that's why we work well together. So go
I love
ahead
it.
and
Here we
start
go.
that show.
Here we go.
Okay.
How you doing, everybody? This is Dennis Michelson. Welcome to the science of fantasy football. Why the science of fantasy football? Well, you get a meteorologist and a biologist together. They're going to use the scientific method. What does that mean to you as a fantasy football player? It means that we're using statistics in a more honest way. We're letting the statistics guide us to an answer instead of using the statistics to back up some preconceived notion that we already have. Using the scientific method is all about having a question, answering that question with statistics, and letting the statistics lead you to the answer instead of the other way around. And I'm telling you, folks, sometimes when you go down that path and you have a hypothesis, the data will tell you that you're wrong, and you have to be able to accept that. And if you can, then you're using the scientific method the right way, and that's guaranteed to make you a smarter fantasy football player. And joining me as he does each and every week, he is the guy that keeps me honest by digging into the data with me. He is the fantasy professor. He's a real professor emeritus. It's John Bush. John, some breaking news for your New Orleans Saints.
Mm,
How do you like this idea of your starting quarterback retiring?
I yeah, I was lamenting. Uh the dog's lamenting. We're all lamenting here in the Saints household here. In fact, I've got my lucky Saints jacket on. My uh so I've got the spirit of the Saints. I'm wearing it today. My new jacket, Dennis. I only break it out every once in a while. So I got the old jacket, the new jacket, and my Reggie Bush jersey that I got. So I'm ready to go here. I'm hoping they'll make room for him in the broom closet in the Hall of Fame one day. Uh, that I think so. So I'm confused by the front office and what they were thinking or not thinking about the draft and what they're doing. And I wondered if this caught them by surprise or not. I guess is my first thought because it seems like it did. Uh, what are people saying out there? They think it's a surprise or
Yeah, I, the reaction seemed to be like all over the place so
yeah, yeah,
far,
yeah.
and so here's the good news.
Okay, there's good
Okay,
news.
here's
Okay,
the good news as far as fantasy football goes.
okay, good news.
My projections that
Okay.
I did for
Uh-huh.
every Saints player,
Olave, all of them.
Olave, Kamara,
Yeah.
uh, even guys farther down the roster, a Brandon Cooks, a
Hmm.
Shaheed, those
Yeah.
kind of guys. All of my analysis, all of my logical ranges of outcomes
Hmm.
using my MVP index. For
Hmm.
instance, Alvin Kamara last year,
Uh-huh.
121.4 on
Nice.
MVP. Okay.
Nice.
Year before, 125, right?
Nice.
So my forecast this year for him
Hmm.
was a low side 65. He had a
Wow.
he had a 66.7 back in
So
22. So that's how he got that number
RB3
established. Correct. And an upside of 120. Okay, so
RB1.
that's RB, top two.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
here's how the forecast was arrived at was a 100, which is 12th.
Yeah, I was about to
RB12
say
typically.
that's yeah, right
And
there.
and the reason that I dropped him 20 points
Hmm.
is because I thought there'd be really uncertainty at the QB position this year for the whole season.
Uh-huh.
I did give Derek Carr a forecast,
Uh-huh.
okay, but his forecast was only a 55,
Wow.
which is outside the top 20, basically.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
it's actually 55 would be more like about 18th.
Yeah.
So I was saying, based on a New Orleans quarterback being about 18th to 20th,
This is what.
that's
Yeah.
this is where the rest of the players will
Well.
happen.
Well.
So
Yeah.
so I'm not adjusting the numbers at
Yeah, I was
all.
about to say, it sounds like for whatever reason, by chance, you ended up envisioning what kind of is more realistic now, given the Cardinals.
Yeah, and I expected he would miss about 5 or 6 games this year because
Yeah.
I even questioned giving him a forecast because I
Hmm.
thought there was a more of a possibility he could miss time
Hmm.
than play a full season. But I said, okay, if he plays 10 games, this
Right.
is where his numbers will be. Because that's how I forecast is if a guy's going to have 10 or more games, and for most players, you can't, you'd have to assume you're Karnak the Magnificent and predict injuries. With other players, like a Brandon Ayuk, for instance, we know he's going to miss time to start the season. I'm saying he misses 6 or fewer games. So I've given him a forecast for his 10-game
Mhm.
MVP total. I did the same with Carr because I said, okay, I don't know how this is going to work out. I think he's going to miss time. I don't know how much time he would miss, but this is where he'll be if he plays 10 games. And I figured we would see the rookie Shuck, is how they want to pronounce that, I guess. Tyler Shuck, Shough, Shuck. Don't get it, but that's how I guess it's pronounced. He might be better than Derek Carr right now.
Mhm.
So I might have to adjust the numbers upwards for Kamara and Olave because Olave I've got down as well. I've got him at a 100 in a range of 70 to 120. So, and he's been kind of an erratic sort anyway. He's been 75 and 100 were his two numbers that he had in full seasons. Last year, of course, he didn't play 10 games. So Shuck could be better. Like Carr, it was a good, solid quarterback. He was never a great quarterback, but I wouldn't mind being the 20th best at what I do at any given time. That's not a indictment of the guy's quality. But he was like somewhere 15th on a good year, 20th on a bad year was where he was as a quarterback. And Shuck could be better than that right now. We don't know. But and as far as contributing to the other players in fantasy football, he could be better. He might not be as good of a quarterback as Carr, but he might be better for Kamara and Olave's numbers because he's got more upside. He'll throw a lot of interceptions, maybe, but he's got a live arm. This kid's got a live arm. It's just, can he play at this level in the NFL? We don't know. They also have Spencer Rattler there, and they've got Jack Hain. They also drafted the year before. Rattler. So they've got 3 young quarterbacks that'll duke it out. And I'm not sure who wins, but
You
I
don't
think
think
Shuck,
they'll go for somebody like Winston or somebody out there? In other words, the quarterback's not on the team yet.
that's a possibility. But I don't think the Saints think that they're a playoff team right now. If if they if they were only missing a quarterback to be a solid playoff team, I think you'd start hearing maybe some Aaron Rodgers talk even to patch and fill for a year, or you might see a guy who's released in training camp get picked up, or you might see a real minor trade for Jameis Winston. I don't think we're going to see that. I think they're convinced that their best course of action long term is to see if any of these three quarterbacks are okay. And if not, they're in the quarterback market next year when there promises to be maybe 4 or 5 or even 6 guys that teams will be willing to take in the first round.
Yeah, it's hard to figure that out. I wish we as fantasy players could hear them saying things straightforward like what you just said. In other words, they would say, well, our range of outcomes is we don't, our ceiling is we don't get to the playoffs. I mean, just admit it. Kind of what do they think their range of outcomes is? It would be nice going into the draft to know what the front office and the coach were thinking, but they won't do that. And that's so we have, you know, pundits like you and others making guesses, but it would be nice if, I guess AI promises to sweep all the quotes and information and put it all together in some type of forecasting. I'm curious where that all comes down the road in say 5 or 10 years. Is that where we're going? And Dennis, I will say, because I actually was thinking about ADP and patterns and outcomes and AI. And here's what I think, and I'll say now, I'm kind of shifting here. You haven't heard this. I think that we as fantasy players will need to move from a lot of this standard information because I think AI is going to go ahead and process all that and it's going to be out there. We will be moving to self handicapping, kind of our diary concept, and finding out who we are as players, our strengths, our weaknesses. I think that's actually going to be almost essential. In other words, in this next, let's say, the era of AI, when, who knows who's writing these articles at these sites now? I mean, if I'm owning one, I guess you could just have AI doing all of it. And, you never know who, if it's real or Memorex making these articles and claims. But I'm thinking we're going to I guess, the importance of self handicapping, Dennis, which you and I know is very important in horse racing,
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
been that way. I mean, people like Andy Byer, he knew what tracks and trainers and styles and things he was good at and would apply himself accordingly. And I don't think a lot of fantasy players do that. And that's why you and I have touted the diary concept and reference class forecasting and understanding what these foundations are so we can figure out how do we stack up against all this. And that, I mean, so as AI runs into our world, and I guess maybe there will be they'll be tagging players' uniforms and you'll have all these parameters. I'm sure respiration rates and you know, uh, I'm wondering what we will get to, and then tagging the ball, checking the spin versus the temperature in the stadium, and I mean, God knows what kind of parameters is coming. Dennis, I can see. I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting. You know, torque of the football versus routes run. In other words, if the quarterback can put a certain amount of spin on the ball, those wide receivers catch better or worse. You see what I'm saying? It's almost like we're doing air yards now. Imagine where we're getting some data like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think what we will be doing more of will be self-handicapping and having our way of looking at things that is not what AI is doing. So we will be doing methods and things that are not common. So we'll be having different streams of information and we'll be self handicapping. So those two concepts are, I did speak of on the 4 videos I released yesterday about the AI from 2013. I'm sorry, the ADP from 2013 to 24, the patterns and things I know we're going to get into. But I'm going to start the discussion with what I just said. Let you comment.
Yeah, and here's the problem that I've seen with AI so far in other arenas. Okay, because in weather forecasting, there is so much data to analyze that, and the trend has been smaller staffs in meteorology and weather forecasting offices. And it makes sense because so much of the job that was done, for instance, 40 years when I came into the business, you were still hand plotting maps.
Mm-hmm.
You had the weather report data in a coded form, and they did that because it was quicker to disseminate on the old teletype in that form because it was a single line of data and it said a lot, but it didn't plot itself for you. So you had to hand plot surface and upper air maps so you could analyze them. Then we got into the point that, computers started getting more powerful, quicker in how they analyze things. They could now read the surface data code as it was coming in and plot the map for you. That saved a lot of time in the weather office. And then it moved on from there, where more and more of the jobs that used to be the grunt work, and you had specialists that literally they were the fast guys in plotting maps. That was their specialty. That was their job. And they would sit at a drafting table all day and they would do these plots, and they were good. You could read them, and they could fit all of the data for that station under the outline of a dime. That was the test back then, 40 years ago. And when computers took that over, those guys were, they were like the buggy whip salesmen. They were obsolete. But what I see in AI right now, because it's being used quite a bit in meteorology, is it's only as good as the human that built it. Because if all we do is find a consensus of data, it just means who has been shouting the loudest. Those are the people that AI picks up on. But in the next generation of AI, the better generations of AI, there'll be the critical thinking skills of experts in the field that will be applied to it. And if you take the 10 best weather forecasters at a particular type of weather forecasting, say the 10 best severe storms forecasters, and you build an AI with their intelligence, that AI will be much better than just some average AI that looks at a consensus. And in fantasy football right now, if you were to apply the existing AI tools, all you'd get is consensus. We already know what the consensus is. It's called ADP. We know how to beat ADP. You and I have been really good at that, at exploiting the consensus, to beat the consensus. And that's how you make money. But now let's say they take the best knowledge of guys like Kellogg, Bob Lung, Bob Harris, Coventry, Mike Reedy, and I go on and on. Let's say you take the skills of 20 different guys, including you, and you program that in to pick out the best data to look at. That AI will be more powerful than just some run of the mill AI that was built to just sniff through all kinds of data. AI needs to be built specifically for the type of forecasting. Otherwise, it won't be any better than Wikipedia, to be honest with you. It'll just be the best facts that we have by consensus right now. And that's not what you need when you're forecasting the future.
Well, that was more than I was expecting. I guess I envision, and this just in the future, that they'll be measuring things we're not measuring now.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Just like in baseball,
yeah,
the spin of the ball
that kind of thing.
has been incredible. None of that has come to football yet.
But I'm saying I think there will be,
Yes.
if they put sensors, you could find which defensive tackles can hit harder, or you could measure each offensive tackle's survival rate, or where he wouldn't be pushed back. In other words, what type of defensive tackle crashing in, what does that crash look like? Who wins that battle? We talk about that in a vague way, saying, well, they're winning the inside battle, or they're dominating the line. You'll hear these things, but that's just visual tools, right? They're people watching the game. But I'm saying, imagine having tools and having the computers putting that all together and modeling and that the more data that comes in. So I think there'll be a run up once those tools are out there and starting to be. And I think the coaches will want those. They would love to have practice and measure who's the hardest hitter. And maybe some of the guards should be the tackles or something like that. You know what I'm saying? In other words, or maybe some of the slot receivers should really be non-slot receivers, or whatever, deeper level of thinking. And I don't know when that's coming, but I can imagine that we'll have to face that down the road. So I'm envisioning self-handicapping as our defense against that. Our homemade metrics that people are not using, and how we use them, and our track record and our forecasting ability, like you're doing now. I mean, and it's been a while, Dennis, and you may have been doing this, but when we first started, I don't remember you uh, really stating the levels of potential outcomes like you just did with the Saints. In other words, 3, 4, 5 years ago when we were back at the Pig, I don't remember anybody doing that, and you were the first I picked up on. And then we've kind of been running together, and now this is what we're doing now. But I don't remember. You may have been doing that, but it wasn't something that you were touting, whereas now you are touting that and using it successfully. I mean, making money's the end result, right? That speaks volumes. Our ROI, and but I'm saying I've seen you change
Oh,
over the
yeah.
last,
Yeah.
you know, kind of pre-podcast, and you and I working together, and then out. We've got a whole new language,
Oh,
And a
yeah.
whole, I mean, and every year where it's changing. And, we try to talk about that. I just don't, I think people that read us and listen, the few that are, thank you, the few, the proud, the that they're still, because they're not actually doing it, Dennis. It takes a while for this fingertip verbiage, right? Our jargon, right? As you know, in meteorology, you guys have jargon. Biologists have a jar. We have our own language, and we communicate with each other. And we're developing our own fantasy football tools and languages, and it's just, as time goes on, Dennis, we're going to get further and further away from the center, right? We're going to be talking things that in the consensus, they don't even know what's going. I mean, what are you talking about? Every year we're moving further and further away from the verbiage that is being bandied about on Twitter. And I think that's very interesting as well. Kind of the big landscape.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, and I can tell you how my journey has come and how it's accelerated since we started working together, and I know exactly why it has accelerated as well. And that's a wonderful thing when you can look and analyze and understand what you know, but even what you don't know. Like you need to be honest enough that with yourself in any forecasting situation. And it was always this way in meteorology, okay? And in weather forecasting, when I was doing it for United Airlines, there were days where I really almost like, and I wasn't shy of saying it, what's going to happen? Do you have a coin? You know, let's flip a coin.
Magic eight ball.
I'm right on the line here. I can see both scenarios. And both scenarios, if you take both scenarios that I'm forecasting, I'm right 96% of the time. So it's not like it was a dumb luck situation. I knew it was either going this way or that way. And there was only a 4% chance that it was going to be off the page, and but it wasn't actionable. Like if you are not better than a 50% solution in a forecast situation, in meteorology and weather forecasting, that doesn't.
Uh-oh. Dennis, I put you on mute. I'm sorry. Oh,
Oh,
there you go.
there
Sorry.
we go. No, so in weather forecasting, if you're only at a 50% likelihood of something to happen, it didn't do the client much good.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're having to make a decision based on going this way or that way, and it's going to be a big deal. But there were times when that was the best forecast. The I am not sure is not reassuring to a client the first time that they're talking with you. But if they've been working with you over 50 weather situations, and 40 of the times you told them this is the way it's going to go, and you were right. 5 you were wrong, and the other 5 you said, I don't have a clue. They understood that you saying, I don't have a clue, was a sign that I better prepare for the worst. Because if I prepare for the worst and the worst happens, then I'm in a better shape than if I prepare for nothing and the worst happens.
Right.
But in fantasy football, in horse racing, in horse racing handicapping, if I'm 50-50 on 2 horses, I come down, do all of my forecasting of the data, and I've got 2 horses left out of a field of 12. How do I handle that? I bet on the horse with the greater odds, right?
Yes.
In fantasy football, if I'm down to two players to take in the first round of a draft and I can't separate them, I look at either position. Will there be more guys in that same position available next round or not? Or I look at, would one of these players possibly slip to the next round? And that way I can double up and I can get both of them. That's how you deal with that uncertainty, is you use your ADP data and you use your knowledge of the game to fill in the gaps of the known knowledge of the game. But this is something I've been doing for a long time, because when I realized about 20 years ago that projections didn't matter, I got really good at projections, Professor, and my ROI didn't change. Now, too many people in fantasy football, they go, that game's just all a luck. And they go on that same path. Instead, I read an article by Bob Lung in a magazine talking about consistency. And I was like a lot of those people. There's no such thing as consistency. Guys got 5 points one week, 40 the next, 20 the next, 3 the next. There's no such thing as consistency in fantasy football. I went into reading that article wanting to think that he was a numbskull that knew nothing, and it just coined a new term to be, that was his thing. He's trying something new. And the more I looked at the way he was doing it, the more I was like, man, this guy's way ahead of his time. He's like, this is brilliant. And so I started looking at the data from a consistency standpoint. But I understood that, in my opinion, and not to say Bob Lung's wrong and I'm right, because we just look at the problem with two different solutions, and both solutions work just fine. But I thought his was lacking a little bit of identifying maybe who had the most upside consistency every week. And that's what I strove to do for the next 10 years. Then our paths crossed. And an amazing thing happens when there's a synergy between two very good people in any industry, when forecasting is the thing they're doing, is your strengths at data analysis and your ability to basically say, no, you're wrong. This is the data is showing you this is where you are not as good. And here's where you're better. And once I saw that, that was a big changing point, because now all of a sudden I know where my strengths and weaknesses are, and I can adjust my strategy to fit that. But that's how so much has changed. And, 4 or 5 years ago, I wasn't sure what to call it. I wasn't sure what I had. All I knew is the more I studied it and the more I tried to work on ways to forecast it, the better my ROI got. Like, I wasn't even very good at this, but the ROI was saying, hey, you're onto something, because there's more money coming in. So I didn't understand why. Working with you, Professor, I understand now why. I understand this whole concept. 15 years ago, I didn't understand that you had to beat consensus to win in fantasy football. I thought the consensus meant something. I thought you didn't go against the consensus as often, because then I realized, well, what we call consensus in horse racing is the favorite. The favorite loses more often than it wins. So the consensus is wrong in horse racing 2 out of 3 times. That was that eureka moment for me of realizing or hypothesizing, what if the consensus is also wrong in fantasy football? It's not wrong 67% of the time like it is in horse racing, but where is it wrong? And why is it wrong? And Professor, that's what we have improved on, is we've improved on being able to forecast when that ADP is probably incorrect. And notice I say probably, because it's a case of risk management in a fantasy football draft. You know, would you take Saquon Barkley with the number 1 pick this year? Well, I see reasons to worry about that. First of all, his MVP index was not number 1 last year in fantasy football. And that would shock people to hear that. Because it was the way he scored his points that was different. His total points, his points per game was fabulous. But it was game scripted, where some games he was great still, but he wasn't that super great consistency, over the top consistency. His MVP score was a 125. Professor, that's dynamite.
Yeah.
But you had 6 guys better than him last year. And that would shock people. And they'd say, oh, your data is garbage. But no, if you dig into the data, you see why Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Jamar Gibbs, Josh Jacobs were all more valuable to your fantasy football team's success than Saquon Barkley. And that shocks people. So he wouldn't be my number 1. Plus the fact he's a year older after having so many carries and touches last year. That worries me. And that's why I say I'll pass on him at number 1 or number 2 or even number 3 in a draft. And that'll shock people. And it's not because I think Saquon Barkley's going to have an awful season. It's just that the risk versus reward isn't a payoff. There are safer players out there, in my opinion, this year. And I could be wrong. I admit that. But by passing on him, this is the part of the draft strategy that you got to get into your head. People say, oh, I don't want to pass on that guy because if he has a great season, if he doesn't get hurt, I'm going to look like a fool. Well, who did you draft? If you drafted somebody who finished in that same tier with him, but had less risk, it didn't hurt your fantasy football team at all. So people need to stop looking and fear this embarrassment of, oh, I passed on the guy and he's number 1. Well, who'd you take? Well, he finished number 2. Okay, well, you did great. Like, if you pick a guy and he finishes top 3 at his position, you've succeeded. I don't care what the guy you passed on did. But that's the mindset that we have to have more of in fantasy football, is not to fear passing on a guy who's great, because you passed on that guy for good reasons. Just like I wouldn't take Christian McCaffrey with the number 1 pick again this year. And I hesitated a few times last year when I had the number 1 pick, because there were reasons to be worried. And maybe that's why I always feel safer going with a wide receiver anyway in the first round. But, the case in point is, you've got to stop worrying about, oh, I passed on that guy and he did great. Well, good. He did great. But how did your guy do? Oh, he did great too. Okay, then don't worry about it. Your strategy was there. So I think that's what we have to look at sometimes with these things, these decisions in fantasy football, is we're too scared to be wrong. Just use your system. You know from your diary that it works. Trust the system, and you'll be rewarded more often than you're wrong. And that's what we got to realize in fantasy football. And that's a place where AI might do a good job, because imagine if I had a programmable AI, or you had a programmable AI, professor, and we could remove all of our emotion from it and just look at ADP and what if we could program it to look at ADP and our data and spit out the best players at each round? That would be a powerful tool, because even as scientifically based as we are, we know we can fall victim to the noise of the consensus. It happens because we're human.
It's, there's a lot to think about that you just said. So when a few, I don't know, weeks ago, you said I was looking at the metric, the Bush figure, and you said it would be nice to know what ADP, what's the standard, what's been going on with ADP, so we can kind of measure what we're doing against that. And so the first step was I stopped what I was doing and immediately shifted to study the ADP from the last few years. And I looked at the preseason ADP, and those players were then graded by their end of the season finish fantasy points per game. So uh, that was what I did, and it's called reference forecasting, a reference class forecasting. And if you go to Wikipedia, it will tell you they called it comparison class forecasting. It's a method of predicting the future by looking at past situations and their outcomes. And the two Nobel Prize winners that got it in economics for behavioral economics, Kahneman and Tversky, uh, won the Nobel Prize, and part of their thinking was this reference class forecasting. Uh, it's named because it can predict the outcome of a planned action based on the past outcomes. In other words, how can I say, if you're going to build a house with a builder, right? If you've ever built a house, it's you can ask them questions. How long is your average house take? What's the average price? How many changes from your blueprints to the finish can we expect? Lots of things that you have, right? I mean, when you buy a car, you look at how did last year's model do with, say, gas mileage, or how does the last 5 or 6 years for upkeep, right? Or, does the transmission drop out after 300,000 miles or 30,000 miles? Big difference. If I'm buying a car, I don't want to be going down the road and there goes the transmission. And here I go. And so it's a way for you to look at what's gone on in the past. And so I did the different positions looking at the ADP, and those movies, videos, lessons are up on Science Fantasy Football, Dennis. Some people have looked at them, some people hadn't, and that's fine. And so what I did was for each position, I looked at the top 36 preseason ADP, divided that pie into three segments, three big pieces of pie. You know, you always cut
Mm.
yourself a bigger pie when you're serving your in laws. You give them the sliver and you get the big hunk of pie, right? Piss them off, right? So they make sure they don't come back for your pumpkin pie. Well, come on, Dennis, we all do that. I mean, to the point where, if they're used to that, they're saying, no, I'll take your piece. I want your,
Oh.
I don't want the slim piece. I want your piece. And so I color coded the top 12 green, the next 12, 13th to 24th, orange, yellow was the last, and then anything out of the top 36. Preseason ADP versus the finishes here, and I'd graphed and figured out percentages. So we talked a little bit about quarterbacks last uh, time. So here's 2019, Dennis. This were the quarterbacks that year. I think I got this from Fantasy Calculators or Fantasy Pros. I got the ADP somewhere. I forgot where, but uh, you know, that year Patrick Mahomes was predicted to be first, that kind of thing. So you can see, and then here's the actual outcomes. Finish EOS end of season outcomes. So Patrick Mahomes was sixth in fantasy points. Not bad. You spent a first pick to get a sixth quarterback. That's not bad. But look at Baker Mayfield that year. Fourth, and he was 26. Rutro.
Ouch.
Yeah,
Ouch.
or Cam Newton, 36. Rutro.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I think if you drafted Roethlisberger too, I think he retired that year. I
Or
don't,
got hurt.
or might
Yeah.
got hurt anyway. I
Yeah.
forgot. Whatever it was,
Ugh.
if you drafted now in best ball, he's probably gone.
Yep.
So just like those that have been playing best ball and were drafting Derek Carr,
Oof.
think about it. A couple of weeks ago, people, too early best ball. I could see people grabbing him as their number
Oh
two in
yeah. Yep.
Superflex.
Yep.
Probably not a one, but a two, maybe a three, and they were rubbing their little feelers, thinking, "Man, I got a bargain here." Rutro. So there's always a cost here. But anyway, each year, and I need to put these down so people can look if they want. And I also down here at the corner, this is what I missed when I say me. I didn't miss. ADP missed here, and you can see, this is who you
Wow.
missed, and so you can see the misses, the hits, and it gives you an idea about things. It's very good. So if you sum all that up, you had 72, was that 6 years of the top 12? And you can see which ones were preseason and which ones finished. So 58%
Wow.
of that's what you've got to beat. You got to be as good as
Wow.
that. Yeah, well,
That's not a lot.
but that's the data.
Yep.
The top 12, it was 87% finished in the top 24. So you only have 3% outs. So that's kind of good that way.
Yes.
So that's some data here. And if you looked at up here at the top, Dennis, is fantasy points per game last year versus the next year. It was 53-23, so 76. So it's a little worse
Oh wow.
than ADP. So ADP is a little better than last year's fantasy points per game. But what I didn't show was what quarterbacks in the top 12 were also in the top 12 fantasy points. So I think there's a suggestion, and I think I may have showed that to you, where I actually looked at the Bush figure and the LR versus the slice, and I looked, and together fewer picks, but they were more successful. So
Yep.
I would predict, and I haven't done this data yet, hadn't done this experiment, is I think the best way to use these two metrics is combine them and know who the super picks are. Let's call it the higher informed picks. They were great last year, top 12 fantasy points per game, and their ADP this year. You see, with rookies, you would have a trouble because, we wouldn't have last year's fantasy points per game. So uh, this ADP includes rookies here, maybe not in the top 12, but somewhere are rookie quarterbacks over the last 6 years, Dennis.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
in this data, so you could actually go and look at rookies as well. So I then cut the slices into half. So the top six, the next six, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look visually at the numbers, the best you could be is if you had the top six. If the average was six, that means you were perfect. And this is 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. 2020, it was perfect. The top six
Wow.
finished in the top six, but not all the time, right? In fact, last year, only three were in the green. So
Wow.
three were in the yellow. So that was not great. But overall, I think last 6 years, four, maybe, somewhere around four. So you just need to know that of the top six this year, Dennis, there's two that might be an issue. So if you're looking at your diary, I would urge you to look at your past performances. Are you able to beat this? Are you able to keep up with this? How's your picks been? How's your top six? Okay, this is what ADP will give you. And here's 7 through 12th. And notice the average is, if you can get half of that, you're doing good. So last year was pretty good for that section. The next six last year, three of
Oof.
those finished in the top. Yeah, yeah. So you can see you actually had some that were even worse. Three of those 6 years, only four were in the top 24. That means two were out of the top 24.
Wow.
So there is a level of risk after the top six quarterbacks, Dennis. And of course, by the time you're getting way deep, if you're a super flex player, it gets lean quick
Yes.
down here. So you need to visualize that, folks, when you're planning your draft. This needs to be part of it. What's gone on in the past? You cannot ignore this. And if you looked at the actual percentages, top six, 72%
Wow.
finished in the top six over,
Wow.
the last 6 years. So that's good to know, right? So that means 91% were in the top 24.
Wow.
Yeah, and nobody was out of the top 36, zero. But if you're down in this range, if you're like, man, my third quarterback in Superflex, it can get bad quick. 67%
Wow.
out. Yeah, so your diary, Dennis, in Superflex especially, and I know you play a lot, how good are you as your third? This is just
Yeah.
be how can you grade yourself? Can you beat that?
Yeah.
And
And
it's not hard to beat
no, no.
somewhere around 50% out of the money if you think about it. So if you're good at these deep quarter, but look, only 6 to 3%, so about 4%, four out of 100 picks, Dennis, would be, in the top 12. And
Wow.
that's almost you're not you'll do better finding in the top 24, right? 40%. So 40 out of 100. So most likely when you're drawing in here, you're hoping for a top 24. Most likely 13th to 24. That's what you want. You want a third quarterback to finish like a second quarterback. You
Yeah.
see, that's another way
Yeah.
to think about that.
Yeah. And last year, I mean, Baker Mayfield was 21st. He was a top six guy.
Yep.
Um, you
Yep.
had
That
had
was right in here. Yeah.
yeah, you had
19.
Sam Darnold 31st,
Yep.
and he finished in the top 12. So
Yeah. It
th
happens.
there were guys that you could logically hit on.
But how good is your total over the last six? And again,
Yeah, yeah,
you need to start now. If you haven't started your diary, you need to handicap yourself, or you're gonna, it's just not doing you any good.
so last year, for instance, my three hottest quarterbacks, like my three most owned quarterback combinations that I was
Mhm.
going for,
Right.
Brock Love at 9, Jared Goff at 15. And we talked endlessly about the advantage that he
Yeah,
had
and
last year
and
with
I'm
only,
showing the 2024. So Goff
yeah,
finished ninth, and
yeah,
he was 15th.
he was 15th.
Here's
And he had
Baker.
Baker was 21st,
Mine was 22nd,
yeah,
and then Bo
22nd. So, yeah,
Nix was 23rd. Look at, and
and
Sam Darnold
yeah,
30th. So
yeah,
there were four low hanging fruits if you were good enough to pick, and the
and,
orange. So you could have got Tua, but 14 and finished 15th. That didn't help you.
no, in Superflex, I was taking guys like either Hertz or Burrow as my number one.
Look at Wilson. Wilson cost you 29th, but he returned 18th. So that's pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah, and I had two of the three of Mayfield, Goff, and Love on every team. I had some Bo Nix
Mhm.
because he was so cheap.
Well,
It
I found that I got Bo Nix later,
Oh yeah, yeah. I got Bo
just all
Nix.
for a dollar,
Yeah, I was getting
that
Bo
kind of thing.
Nix. I was getting Bo Nix as like the 28th quarterback off the board in some drafts,
Yeah.
and I know
But some
23rd
drafts he
was
wasn't even drafted.
no, and this is the thing. In one quarterback leagues, he wasn't even taken.
Nope. And he
So,
was out there.
and he was a guy that we were talking about a lot,
Yeah.
and it wasn't that we thought he was going to be a top 12 quarterback, but we thought he was a pretty safe play that late in the game. We were bragging about that guy. So
Mm-hmm.
you can hit on these late quarterbacks is what the moral of the story is. I
But
mean,
it's lean after
it's
the
lean.
25th.
It's lean. And that's why I say, remember what I've been preaching as the quarterback strategy last year and again this year. After three guys are off the board, you better get a quarterback. You better think about a quarterback. And that will get you more often than not one of those guys in the top six.
Well, this is the final figure. I like colors here, Dennis.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is preseason top 12 or in sixes, and finish in the top 12 is green. So you can see the green goes down. And
Yes.
by the 25th, and if you're super
Woo.
flex, if you can grab, you know, at this point, unless you're good, I wouldn't be picking a quarterback after 30 have gone unless they
No,
just, because
no.
look at the out ratio. Most likely you're drawing dead.
Yeah.
So you need to understand this is what you memorize right here, and you plan accordingly. Now, Dennis, what I'm going to do, and I'm not showing you now, but what I do is make a landscape of the current draft before I draft by my
Yes.
position. So
Yes.
I'm going to have that. I'll know what round the top six quarterbacks, where that goes. So I'll have landmarks with this kind of data in my head with the pattern, and I'll go ahead and have that planned to, okay, sixth round, it says six quarterbacks are gone, or fifth round, whatever it is. I'll need to know that landmark and plan accordingly, right? And you just need to have that in your versus, 12 beers in. I guess I'm ready to draft now. That's why like I said, that's why you booze it up, fellas. Booze it up. If there's a big money league and you can buy everybody lots of shots of whiskey, go ahead. You're investing in your ROI, Dennis. That is the cost of doing business with your buddies. But again, like I said, I got that bottle of Johnny Walker Blue, that rare bottle, and I just fill it with the old granddad whiskey, the old generic whiskey. The white label with whiskey at the bottom. That with the dust on it. You pull that out for a few bucks, pour it in the fancy bottle. Boys, y'all are worth my best whiskey right here. Let's all go draft. Y'all drink up. And this, that's how I would do it. So
So
anyway,
this is keep that graphic up because I want to explain to you what my Superflex strategy was last year.
okay.
And this will show it, and I didn't even know this data, but this is how I've been drafting. So if I'm an early pick, if I'm a top 6 pick in a
Superflex.
not a dynasty, but a redraft Superflex, I'm top 6 pick. Most of the time, I'm going quarterback for my first quarter. My first pick is going to be a quarterback. But if I'm picking 7th to 12th in that draft, I'm getting off the quarterback as my first pick. And I might not even take a quarterback with my second pick. I might be really daring. But this is the strategy. If I get a quarterback in the top 6, then I get my second quarterback either in 7th to 12th or 13th to 18th. Okay. Then I get my third quarterback pretty quick, either in the 13th to 18th or 19th to 24th. So I've got 3 quarterbacks and I've got 2 bullets from pretty good scenarios.
Yep.
Now, if I miss on a quarterback in the top 6, I'm more than willing first round to go with the best running back or the best wide receiver, or even a tight end. In certain circumstances, like this year, if I'm picking 12th,
Yep.
I might take a Brock Bowers or a Trey McBride, especially if it's tight end premium in addition to being super flex. But if I pass on that quarterback in the first round, then I'm getting my 3 quarterbacks from the 7th to 12th, 13th through 18th. I'm not waiting for that third quarterback. So I'm getting all 3 quarterbacks in that 7 to 18 range. And I've got 3 bullets, not just 2. I'm never taking 2 quarterbacks in a super flex. And this data shows you why. Because you're going to miss on one of them if you're having to take guys after the top 6. And it's rare that you can double up with quarterbacks in the top 6. You're usually one from 1 to 6, 1 to 7 to 12, and then one from either 13 to 18 or 19 to 24. But if I miss on that early quarterback, I'm coming quarterback, and sometimes quarterback 3 straight picks to make sure that I've got 3 bullets in that 7 to 18 area. And now I see why that strategy has been successful. And it's numbers. The numbers show me why it's successful, because I might not get a quarterback in the green, but I got a good shot at getting 2 or 3 quarterbacks in that yellow, or the orange, I should say. So I've got a really good chance of having 2 quarterbacks that are in that 12th to 24th batch, and maybe all 3. And that's the edge in Superflex. It's not so much the best quarterback total you have every week. It's your total quarterback and Superflex combined. Is that beating your opponent? And with my strategy, I am beating my opponent with that attack, especially in best ball. And I did really well in best ball Superflex for that reason this year or last year. So the data is showing me why I was successful. I didn't even know that this was a strategy that was based on the evidence. I just saw it, that this has worked for me in the past. Now I know why it's worked for me in the past. But this data is amazing.
So couple things. with the landscape of how it is in Superflex patterns, you can know what draft rounds these things are happening, right? So you can map your
Yes.
strategy, Dennis.
Yes.
That's the other part that I'm not showing you folks that I do. And notice we are taking out the name bias right now. I'm just planning a general approach, kind of how I'm going to, where the low level is, where the high ground is. If I'm going into a battle, I need to understand, this over here is swamp, over here is the mountains. I just need to, nobody's doing this kind of
No.
stuff in this way. And
No.
I think I give you an advantage because this to me just I can visualize strategy that works with what is reality. That's it's called reference class forecasting. And I know it's early. People, most people are not even awake to this, and that's fine. They won't catch out. But I combine this with the landscape patterns of what's going on right now, and I do that. I'll be doing that throughout the summer. Dennis, probably the best ball at about June or so. I'll start maybe picking. I'll do 20 or so, maybe $100 worth, just to have, uh, and we'll start trying to beat that a little bit. Last year, just to let you know, my best strategy I performed. I did early, mid, and late quarterback
Yep.
drafting,
Yep.
and went. Uh, I didn't necessarily have a pattern for running backs or wide receivers. I did try to get an early tight end, but other than that, and what happened, I did better with late quarterbacks because I ended up on Baker Mayfield
Yes.
a lot in my best ball, and that guy just, you know, helped me out a lot with that. So it worked out. So I'm probably going to be doing an experiment this year in best ball where I'm just going to do late quarterback, and I'm going to probably do maybe early running back or early wide receiver. I may vary. In other words, take 10 and go early running back bias versus early wide receiver just to see what happens in that scenario. So I'm going to do another experiment, folks. I don't use the $5 best ball to necessarily make money. I'm using the test strategy, and I actually lost $20 last year, and that's fine. I don't care. That to me, I won seven, championships. I won a lot of money last year, folks. I did well. And it probably because starting the best ball informed me about things. And then having Dennis's opportunity based late round wonders.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, I was all in on, finding that. I'm looking forward to that piece of the pie, folks. So I have the ADP, fantasy points per game. I've got that information as well, just like these charts, but it's fantasy points. And I've got that data done. I'll need to make a movies of all that. So I have that. I'm going to have Dennis's opportunities. I'm going to be looking hard. It is better than zero. We're going to be combining the Bush MVP, Com, whatever metrics with Vegas. I'm going to be putting that together. So I've got about 5 or 6 slices of bread here, Dennis. I'm doing a Dagwood sandwich, they call it, right? Where you just
Yes.
build, right? So, this is not all, folks. I'm not done, right? I'm just going to go fishing until August and use this data. Not at all. This is just setting the table, right? Remember, Dennis, when you're eating oysters, you have to have the oyster spork on the table for you. You don't
Yes.
want to offend your highfalutin in-laws, Dennis, you forgot the oyster sport. You didn't polish my oyster sport correctly. So you got to have the oyster spork, right? You got to have the fish knife. And, you know, I found some website somewhere where they actually had a list of all the theoretical tools
Oh
that
boy.
yeah, a fish knife and fruit knife. And it's like, what the hell? Usually when I was fishing was a kid, I had a pocket knife and, I'd stab the fish and then cut the package of spam open, or and put it on a cracker with a sardine or something. I mean, that was how we lived. I would not, if I'd go back in time, there's no way I could eat how I ate as a kid. There's just no way to been drinking, gallon of Tang and spam every day. People don't know what Tang is. I want to be an astronaut. And so you drink Tang, right? I don't even know what Tang was. It was like it
Oh,
tasted like those Flintstone vitamins,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and my mom would get mad at me. I'd take a handful of those vitamins because they would taste like candy,
Oh,
and start running, like your dog. Think about it. You and your dog, you sit there and he wonders what's in your mouth and you wonder what's in his mouth. And that's all day. That's people want to say, what's it like having a dog? You watch each other use the restroom and you figure out what's in each other's mouth. That's about
oh,
90% of the
yeah.
day, right? And then you try to get it out of their mouth and there they go, right? My little dog, he doesn't give anything. And his, French bulldog, his teeth, they don't come
Oh,
unglit. If he
oh.
gets something in his mouth, you're going to have to take some pliers to get it out because he's not giving it up. Anyway, Dennis, that is just one this is one chapter in the book that we've got to assemble by August, Dennis. It's coming, but it's good to know this data. So,
Yeah, in this data, I'll reiterate why this is so important because at quarterback in one quarterback leagues, and now that we've seen the data, we know we want two shots at that top six guy. Okay, we don't want to be fishing outside of that top group, but if I got to, then I want that 7th to 12th group. Okay, I don't want to be taking chances late. The way I draft my quarterback in one quarterback leagues, and I do the same thing with tight end. I see where the tight ends and where the quarterbacks are going in the draft. And so if I want Burrow, I got to take him before, and this is the way I think about it. Burrow, his ADP is 42nd right now, 42nd overall pick. He gone. That's on average.
yeah.
So when I look at that, my brain says if I want Joe Burrow on my team, I have to pick him before the 42nd pick. Now, I might get lucky and I might get as late as 46, but let's say I'm sitting in a draft and I got the 37th pick in that draft. I know by the next pick will be long gone. It's do I want Joe Burrow here? That's the way you've got to think. My quarterbacks that I've got highlighted. Now, this doesn't mean they'll be the only 5 quarterbacks I take, but they're spaced out through the draft. I've got Burrow at 42. I got Mahomes at 65. I got Nix at 84, Goff at 97, Prescott at 118. I'd like to have 2 of them. 2 of them, please. It doesn't mean I'm always going to get 2 of those 5, but they're spaced out enough. And I understand that once I'm past pick 90, a lot of people are going to be taking swings at running backs and wide receivers. And those are the guys I'm usually avoiding because they're ordinary. They're like a 70 MVP. I've already got a couple that are above that. Now I'm going to take a swing at the young player who's either going to be 90 or he's going to be a 40. Like he's either going to be a boom or a bust. And I'll take those guys all day long because you can change out your roster. But that's how I think of quarterbacks and tight ends. Where do I have to pick to get these guys? And obviously, they're not my top 5 quarterbacks. Burrow is number 1 in my MVP. Thankfully, he's number 5 on everybody else's list. So I got a
So
shot at
you'll
getting
have a shot at getting him.
got a shot at getting him. Mahomes is my 7th rated guy, but he comes at a point in the draft that I think he's cheap. 65 overall for a guy who could be a top 5 quarterback. I'll take that chance. And then Nick's is the same way. Nick's had a 82.4 MVP as a rookie.
Right.
What if he gets 10% better? Now all of a sudden he's a 90 and he's going to pick 84. I'll take that every day of the week. So that's how I think of quarterback. And this data says that my strategy is probably based on sound reasoning.
So I've got all the positions, folks, where I kind of go through. I probably get a little preachy. I'm sorry. And, that's just the way it is. So I'm going since you kind of know the format, you can catch my video to catch up. But I'm going to go to the 6 sectors for tight ends, Dennis. And again, Green finish in the top 12. So let's look at tight ends. Different story here, Dennis. If you
Wow.
remember, quarterbacks, if we could get 4 out of 6 that were in the top 6 to finish, tight ends, it's not unheard of to get 5.
Yes.
And notice the last 3 years has been really interesting versus the 3 years before. So there's been a shift that way. But boy, if you wait too late, look at the outs here.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's no almost no hope if you're getting a third tight end, Dennis, and you're waiting. Yeah, it's lean. It's lean out in here. But you need to know that.
Yes.
And you see that the green really disappears even after the 12th tight end. It gets lean. It gets lean. So at best, you're drawing 2 out of 6 or one
Wow.
third. So you're drawing 2/3 dead if you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna wait for my tight end till the 13th to 18th. 2 of the 3 are dead. They're not
Wow.
going to be in the top. Yeah, so you need to know that. I'm not saying you shouldn't. If your diary says you can draw and you'll get that 1/3, then fine. You think about if you can do that and your diary says you're great at that over the last 6 years, Dennis, you have such an advantage over your league if you're that damn good, right? And you can
Yes.
test yourself. This is why it's called reference forecasting. This tells you what the public can do. Can you beat them? At least can you tie them? And right now, my feeling with tight ends is you just kind of probably going to keep up with them. I
Yes.
don't know if like I said, unless you're taking the extreme strategy of like trying to stream them. Like, okay, I'm going to take 2 tight ends in this range and stream them. I mean, you can try that experiment. I wouldn't do it in a very expensive league if you did want to try that for a few years, have that experiment going. But that looks pretty tough. If you can do that and make that work, think about it. You have such an advantage because everybody's rushing to get these top tight ends, and you have an advantage because you can get stockpile, quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, and they're all cutting each other's throat to get that good tight end. So again, just how good are you at position? So your strategy cannot be the same, Dennis, across all positions. That's another takeaway. If you're treating quarterbacks like tight ends, you're doing it wrong. And so not only do you have to know each position has a strategy, but you have the patterns, and then you look at Dennis's forecast, you look at opportunities, all these come together, but you cannot treat quarterbacks and tight ends the same.
No,
And I
no.
think you'll see that the other positions have their own quirks as well. But I haven't seen anybody show any of this data or talk about any of this in strategy terms.
No, no. And that's the important thing is again, my tight end strategy is a little different than my quarterback strategy. Because you notice when I was talking quarterback strategy, I said I want to get two of these guys.
Yep.
Tight end, I only take one for the most part. But here's the difference on that. If I don't get a guy in the top six, let's say that I gamble, because the top six, for instance, this year, just to give you a little idea, the top six goes in ADP. The top six goes as early as pick number 5, believe it or not. That's Bowers. Pick number 6 off the board is all the way at 68.
Yep.
That's a huge difference than a quarterback. Okay. So my strategy in tight end is I look at one of the top 2 guys. For instance, in this year's draft, I've got Bowers and McBride 20 points better than anybody else in the league in MVP. That's a huge gap. So I look at Bowers and McBride and I say, McBride's at 13. They're close enough that, yeah, I'll take a shot there. But if I don't get McBride at 13, I don't just automatically take Kittle at 31. I think Kittle at 31 is priced too close in performance. I think he's going to be too close to Kelsey, Andrews, and Hawkinson, but he's 20 to 40 positions ahead of them in the ADP. I'm not paying that. So I look at 3 tiers to tight ends. Do I want my top guy, one of the top 3? Okay, I got to pay up for that. If I can't get top 3, then I'll be happy with 4 to 6. If I don't get 4 to 6, I'm not taking number 7. Okay, I'm waiting and I'm taking 2. And this year, if I take 2, it'll be between Ertz, Loveland, and Brenton Strange from Jacksonville. I'll have to pay 93 before pick 93 to get Loveland. But then Strange is at 145, Ertz is at 153. I kind of like those numbers. But that's the strategy I use at tight end, which is a little different. But I'm willing to understand if I don't get a top 3 guy, I probably don't want 4 to 6. Because 4 to 6 and 7 to 12 are probably going to end up being pretty close in points per game.
And I switched to the overall summary figure. I think you kind of like this, but here's
Yes.
something that I found, and I talked about this. If you add the green and the orange, top 24, a tight end in 13th to 18th, and 19th to 24th, Dennis, is about 53, and this is 28, 61. 53, 61. In other words, if I'm drafting in here, I'm not sure. I understand there's a little bit of difference in 30, 28% versus 17. I realize there's a skew, but overall, finishing in the top 24, it's pretty damn close.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
almost think my second tight end, I'm better. In other words, if I grab one of this, I'm probably grabbing one probably in this range. I mean, if some of these fall, but I'm not immediately, oh, I've got Bowers. Now I'm fishing in here. I'm not, I may
No.
fish in there.
Yes.
I don't want to fish in here.
No.
You
No.
know, most likely you're drawing dead in here. So
Yes.
you need to treat this as one strategy, this is the second, and this is kind of the third, and you don't want to be here. So if I miss here, then I'm probably drawing here, but then maybe I'll force it here. In other words, I'll do 1 and 2. But if I get
Correct.
this, I may go 1 and 2. In other words, you need to decide what your strategies in overall is going to be, a landscape of your strategy. And before I even look at names, because people, names, you're tricked from last year, Dennis, that
Oh yeah.
cognitive
Yeah.
bias. You
Yep.
remember, boy, Kelsey sucked last year. Well, he really didn't suck compared to a lot of them. Okay,
Yeah. He sucked
but you
because of
can
where you
trick
drafted
yourself.
him.
Yeah, you can. So I like to think about this overall strategy before I start putting names and teams. And if you read an article right before you draft, Kelsey's coming back this year, you may be biased a little bit towards him. Versus Kelsey's going to suck this year. Yeah, I mean, it could trick you. You may not even realize it. You're getting swayed a little bit. We're humans, right? Is it the saber-toothed cat in the weeds or squirrel? Our ancestors didn't stick their head in there to figure it out. They were up the tree. And that's just that fight or flight. Just remember that can be, tricked there.
Well,
So
it's very interesting you say that about forgetting the names because that process that I just talked about in how I picked out quarterbacks
right,
and tight ends, I looked at my forecast in MVP versus the ADP,
right.
and I picked the guys that fit that pattern. The names were all the way on the far left of the screen. I didn't see them. So when I picked McBride as one of my early target guys, it wouldn't have mattered whether Bowers or McBride was first or second in my rankings.
Mm-hmm.
It mattered that of my top two guys, one's going 8 picks later.
Right.
And then it looked at it and go, oh, that's Trey McBride.
Right.
But that's how you've got to handle this. You've got to be as blind to the player as possible.
And
And it's
so,
very hard for us to do.
yeah, so again, I think this is leading us to different approaches and thinking. So I would urge you, and I'll try to have the static images, but I would just sit there and think. Just watch and think, write notes, put your diary. What are you thinking now in May? And look at your diary then coming into August. What are you thinking? Or words, are you being swayed? I think over the years, I think I get too excited in June and July and are
Yeah.
not really being strategic. And last year, Dennis, when we did the draft night out and we started putting those metrics together as an
Oof.
average, I
Yeah.
think only then was I starting to envision things. I think all up to that point, I was kind of bouncing around and wasn't really focused. I'm looking forward to trying to uh, get this data like in June, our metrics a little bit, have a
Yes.
little more
Yes.
time to kind of
Yes.
gel with this. But folks, last year, I felt like I didn't really hone down until Dennis and I worked it out. So I think, Dennis, we need to try to work that out by the end of June and then you and I do some drafting together, kind of simulate the, maybe a best ball or two, just you and I talking through it. Maybe we should do a fast best ball, kind of put a little time on us, because I need to start practicing envisioning our combined metrics a little bit. I do want to do that. I felt like I would have had a better advantage if we could have done the draft night out in July. I think I would have had a month's more think. Of course, you could argue 1 month more to f up, but hopefully a month more to think about and fine tune probably those later strategy. I felt like our chaos picking running backs, we weren't quite as laser pointed on those. We were just kind of grabbing pieces, and really weren't debating those too much. Our big strategy was, well, could have an opportunity. And there was a whole bunch. I think there's some depth there that we need to think about. That's why I want you to do your opportunity index a little bit, because I want to try to incorporate that into our diary to try to get us a little more fine tuned on that. So that's just something that has occurred to me this week while I'm doing this, Dennis. I felt like I was really laser focused more after the draft night. I feel like that was a good practice for my FFPC redrafts. I felt like I was more sure about my first half of those drafts. I really knew what I needed to do. And
Yeah,
I need more time to get better still, because I'm greedy. I want more. I want more money.
yeah, we should probably do a mock draft live during a show
Yeah,
against ADP using our combined metrics
yeah. I think we
as
need to
a
do that.
as a strategy, and we should probably do that here in the next month, and just see where we are. And because I think that strategy will also let us know what we need to work on more.
That kind of thing. But I
Yeah.
felt like that my later RBs, I wasn't. It was just kind of like, okay, could be. This could have opportunity. It wasn't like I thought deeper than that.
And sometimes
Does
though
that make sense? I understand maybe
it
that's where we're
makes
at.
total sense, but at RB more than any other position, I think there's two ways that you have to look at the position. You have your guys that are your safe bets to be solid RB1s or RB2s.
Right.
That's a small population.
It is.
And then you've got your guys that if they get a chance, they could do something. So last year, for instance, two guys that we were higher on than consensus, like way higher on than consensus, were Chase Brown and Bucky Irving. We hit on both of those. Okay. But one of our better forecasts was looking at Las Vegas and saying Zamir White isn't the guy.
Right.
Now it turned out nobody was the guy.
Yeah.
But that was a useful forecast, because we knew, okay, this guy is not worth taking where he's being drafted. That's a free square now for us, because we are taking a better player there. But this idea of safety by round or upside potential by round, if I take 5 shots at guys like we did last year, okay, there's always like 5 guys that we're taking a shot on. And last year, if let's say there were 5 on the board, and the only 2 we hit on were Chase Brown and Bucky Irving,
Yeah.
that was still a successful year, because we hit 2 out of 5. Like we nailed them where they were starting RB1s each and every week. Solid. And you don't get that outside of the top 24 very often. That's where those guys were going.
The
Like,
few the where I had those guys, it was a treat later in the season.
oh,
Just
yeah.
plug them in and start
Look,
worrying about quarterbacks. I had streaming issues, but it wasn't. If I had those guys, there was no issue. They were in.
no, no. And that's exactly the way you have to attack that position. You've got your safe guy early. Okay. And when I say safe guy, is this year it's guys like Bijan Robinson, Jamar Gibbs. Those are your safe top guys. Your next safe list of guys this year, in my opinion, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown. That's it. Okay. So it's lean in that second safe zone. And that doesn't mean that I think Barkley and McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry are going to be busts or Devon Achane. It just means if I invest in those guys, I'm taking their backup. Like if I grab Achane, I'm thinking his backup later in the day. So as soon as I pick Achane, I research what his backups, his potential backups, because there's two. There's Ollie Gordon, the rookie, and there's Jalen Wright, the rookie from last year. I'm grabbing one of those two guys to back up Achane.
And in best ball, you could grab both.
I grab all three,
yeah,
comfortably.
Grab 3.
And but in the same idea, if I grab Derrick Henry with Baltimore, I'm thinking, where is his backup? Is it Keaton Mitchell? That's who I think it'll be. I better look to see if I grab him. But that's the theory of how you need to attack the running back position. If I take Barkley this year, and there's teams that I'll take Barkley, if he falls to like 5th in the draft, if I'm picking 5th and he's there at number 5, I'm probably taking him. But late in the draft, I'm taking A.J. Dillon. Like, I don't care that A.J. Dillon hasn't done anything for a couple of years. They didn't add him to the team for no good reason. They didn't draft another running back. Will Shipley is not the backup for Saquon Barkley. A.J. Dillon will only pay off if Barkley gets hurt. But if I got Barkley already, what do I care? That's the strategy. That's the way you have to think at running back. If I take Kyren Williams in the draft, and he's going the 12th running back off the board right now on average.
Right.
If I take him, I'm taking either Blake Corum or I'm taking the rookie, Hunter, because I want protection. If I take Breece Hall, I'm taking Braylon Allen. If I'm taking Joe Mixon, I'm taking Woody Marks. If I'm taking Kenneth Walker, I'm coming right back and taking Zach Charbonnet. And in that case, I might end up with 2 guys worth starting. But that's the strategy at running back. If you've got these safe guys, you got these couple of safe guys early, and still I wouldn't be hesitant to take a David Montgomery if I got Gibbs. I wouldn't be hesitant to take David Montgomery if I don't have Gibbs. But that's the strategy that I'm thinking of at the running back position, is protect yourself at all times. Wide receiver, I don't play that game.
So here is the wide receiver distribution, 19 to 24 versus end of the season. Ooh. And Dennis, look at 25 to 30. You're drawing dead in here.
Ooh.
I did not realize that it was that bad by
That
ADP.
is bad.
That is bad. So that means we need to figure out our strategy to take advantage of this sectors here. It looks like The top six are kind of who you think they are. I mean, I would love to see higher than three out of the six come back in. I would like to see closer to four, but there's some issues there. Here's the 7 to 12, and then here's this world, and then that world. So if you
Oof.
look at the overall sum, this is the picture here. And again, these guys are different than these guys and these guys. They are different. This is 61% and 19, so roughly 80% the top 24. Here's 39 and 33, so about 70 something percent, and 22 and 64. So one might argue if you grab this, if you want a strong WR, it's kind of like the tight end trick almost. You
Yep.
might could wait
Yep.
till here, but if you're forced by draft pick to grab one of these, you either uh, grab two or figure out another strategy. But boy, if you're down in here, Dennis, you look
Woo-hoo.
hard at opportunity or something else.
Well, here's the greatest news. This chart is why we are winning money in fantasy football,
Yes, yes,
because the better than zero strategy says
yes.
you want 3 or 4 of the first 18 wide receivers taken.
Mm-hmm.
And then to fill out that last position. So now I've got 3 of the top 18.
Yeah.
That gives me a solid base. And maybe I got 4 of the top 18. My last wide receiver, I'm taking a guy with upside potential. And if I miss, I'm taking somebody else off of waivers. So in that 25 to 30 and 31 to 36, we're either in green and white or we're in the worst, and we don't care which one we hit, because that's a bonus player on our rosters. So this is a great graph for us because it shows that the better than zero strategy, which of course took about 10 years to develop, is based on sound theory. Because we didn't even know it. We just knew that our diary says this is successful. Now the data is telling us why.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. I wasn't aware of this. I haven't until you do the data, sometimes
Yep.
you're not aware of things. So figuring out where the 25th through 36th or worse running wide receivers are in the draft. I don't know what round that is. I mean, we could look now and say, so that tells me you need to be shifting. You just need to know what you're going to do in there. I mean, people talk about the dead zone. Here's the dead zone for wide receivers, Dennis. And it's just you need to think about what's going on and how you're going to deal with that. And now I think now that I know it's there, I'll be a little, it's like, if I stick my hand in the water, there's probably an alligator. I really hadn't thought about it like that, but now I
so
do.
so it's a pretty wide area because 25th is going off the board 58th right now.
Yeah.
And 36th is going off the board 86.
Yeah.
So that's a 28 pick
Two,
swing.
two rounds. Yeah.
But we've got our guys.
By
Like
then.
we've got our guys. We've got 3 wide receivers in the top 18. If you look at our teams from last year that we drafted using better than zero, we had 3 wide receivers of the top 18. Now, we might not have had the 3 best out of the top 18, but we took 3 guys. The odds are in our favor that we're not going to have any busts. And then late, we didn't take any ordinary guys. So, for instance, 25th in my rankings, when you get to about, Remember, I tell you, I never take a wide receiver with lower than an 80 MVP index.
Yes.
32nd is the guy is starting at the 75 forecast is that's
That's
32nd on the
yeah,
board. And
that's really interesting then.
and the
It
data
course,
says,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So the data says, hey, you're doing something right, um, because last year, for instance, 28th or the first guy under 80 was 25th
Yeah.
in MVP. So there's a case where I like our odds that were earlier than that.
So, running backs, I know we're speeding up a little bit. We had a lot to say about quarterbacks. So, running backs, Dennis, let me show you the pattern here, and I think it's going to be different than you imagine here. This is
Oh boy.
the, yeah, so looks like the average of the top six running backs is about a four back in the
Yep.
top 12. And some years, all six are in the top 24.
Yep.
And look at 7 to 12. It's almost like 1 to 6, Dennis.
Yep.
And some ways, 13 to 18 are a lot like. But after the 18th, it becomes something different, and the 31st is different. So this, it almost looks like you've got this world, 1 to 18, 19 to maybe 30, and 31 to 36. In other words, the slices are different.
Yeah.
And this is how it looks. Look at 60th, 50th, Dennis. We've never seen that at all. No, has anybody reported this? Look at the gap between there, and I'll go ahead because I've already done the gap. Because uh, that's who I am right here. So what I did was I looked at all positions and asked the question 1 to 6, 12, 12, what's the gap? Look at the size here, tight ends, wide receiver. Look at running backs, Dennis. They are
Wow.
completely different.
Wow.
6 years of data. Folks, this is really amazing. The way
So
I interpret this is if you wish to wait to after 6 RBs are done, I'm not sure it's hurting you. Just
no.
like Derrick Henry last year,
Oh yeah.
I think you grab that early wide receiver, come back with a running back. It's almost playing into that's your strategy. Depends on your draft pick and all. I mean, I'm not going to turn down one of these, right?
No,
1 to
no.
6. But if I got drafts, pick 7 and first 6 picks are wide receivers, I'm not going to feel, running backs, I'm not going to feel bad picking the seventh running back.
No, and what this data says is that again, better than zero, which was developed based on diary data,
Yeah.
not data,
Yeah.
is right on the money because it says, hey, if I don't like one of those early running backs that
Mm-hmm.
is left, I go early wide receiver.
Yeah.
And I go back to an early wide receiver. I go wide receiver, I'm fine because I'll catch my running backs later. And that data tells us that we're not losing out as much.
And so I have this figure looking at all positions. Look at 25th to 30th tight
Wow.
ends. Look at wide receivers. Look at running backs. Completely different. Nobody's reported that to
And
me.
this is where that opportunity game comes into play
Yeah.
because again, it wasn't so much that we knew who, but we knew who it won't be.
Yeah.
New York Giants. It won't be Singletary. And we were right. Who was it? It was Tracy. So the whole concept of opportunity at running back is probably paying off better than at any other position.
And so I'm kind of speeding up, but here's an interesting figure. This is out of the money. So the six and then out. Look at running backs, 13th to 18th. Look at the difference between tight ends, wide receivers, quarterbacks, a little bit better, but running backs are different, Dennis.
Yeah.
You're picking the top 18 running backs. Very few are ever out of the top 36.
Wow.
What I think that's telling us is injuries are causing the top six guys to be shifted down a little bit. I think we're detecting injuries a little bit. Not that they're out for the season injuries, but they're losing 2, 3, 4 weeks. And
Yeah.
that's then putting the 7 through 12 guys up a little bit. Everybody's taking a step up during those injuries. And so if you scramble all that together and if you look over the 6 years, this is the strategy here. It's not like 13th to 18th are all out, percentage wise. I mean, numbers, it's not that way at all. So you're taking some hits, but it's not fatal with running backs. And I'm not sure I'd envision, like CMC was in the top 36 last year, believe it or not, by
Right.
fantasy points per
Yep.
game.
Yep.
If you just judge it like that. And so, yes, he was drafted here, but he ended up there. And so he
Yes.
wasn't out. He was still in this mix. But Dennis, running backs are different than wide receivers.
Wow. That is
Yeah,
a that
nobody has
yeah.
ever shown this. I think this is a suggestion of that injury concept, and it's not as late as you think. I think it's earlier is what's causing. And I think if we plotted opportunities in here somewhere, I think that would show this a little more as well. I think there's some more data to be stacked on top of this. But I
And this
thought you would really love this.
yeah,
Nobody's ever showed anything like this.
no, and I am really loving this because if I look at just the top guys over 100 in MVP index, there's more variability every year at running back than there is at wide receiver. So in other words, wide receiver over 100 over the last 5 years, the low is 10, the high was 13. With running backs, the low is 11, the high is 16.
Yeah.
You've got a five variance of five in there. If you look at tight ends, the difference is 1 to 3.
Yeah.
So it's a very tight group. Running backs, the data says, are very different, and that's good information to know when you're going into a draft, but it also explains why better than zero has worked because we take more shots at running
And
back.
again, thinking about the gap,
Yep.
thinking about the out ratio running backs. Folks, something you cannot draft like you do for all positions. If you're drafting Dennis in the same kind of sleepy mode, I'll take this and then I don't know what I'm doing, you're going to get surprised. And
This is
this tells you
yeah.
this should slam on the brakes and like, hey, I need to understand each position a lot more than I have been. And I've never seen anybody talking about. I mean, everybody's now debating which running back, rookie is this and that. Dennis, I'm not even to that point yet. I need to set the, in other words, they're not even worried about the size of the board, the monopoly board. How many
Yes.
properties are, how many properties you going to have to worry about? They're not even worried about the size of the game board. And Dennis, I'm trying to visualize the whole game first and then start cherry picking things. And I think people are jumping the gun right now and they need to step back. Nobody's doing landscape work, top down work, and they need to.
And
And
here's the important part of why I think they're so different. is because at wide receiver, every team's got at least two wide receivers on the field
Yes.
that they're using. They only got one running back that
Yes.
they're usually leaning on. Okay. And the teams that don't have one running back they're leaning on are why this is a smaller gap, because they're sharing the load. And when you're sharing the load, when wide receivers share the load, there's still more than enough passes to go around. When running backs share the load, then it gets skimpy. And that shorter gap tells you that.
I think it's telling us about injuries and opportunities.
Injuries, opportunities, it's
And
telling
I
us a
think
lot.
this really tells us to be cautious about, it's worth our time to do your opportunities, Dennis. This is the
Yep.
time and again, I don't expect the first year we'll have it down pat, but at least we're trying. And I'm curious to see how we start working that. I hope in a few years we'll have enough metrics to change it if we need to. But I think that's going to be important for running backs, especially. In other
Yeah.
words,
And
the level of importance for opportunity is not, I think people, oh, opportunity. Well, then they look all across. And I'm not sure the same amount of importance is the same across the position. I think it's different.
no, it definitely is different. And one good thing is we've got a good track record of this concept at running back, safe job, in jeopardy job.
Mm-hmm.
And if we use that to frame how we're drafting guys, for instance, Bijan Robinson, if I draft him, if I can grab Tyler Algier later, great. If I don't have room on the roster, no big deal. But if I grab James Conner with Arizona, I am looking to also add Trey Benson,
Right.
because there's a possibility there could be a changing of the guard, because one guy is hitting his age 30 season and the other is a young player on the rise. That is, so there are two ways that you can be vulnerable at running back. You can be just not a great running back,
Right.
or you can be a great running back that's getting older. And we can make a forecast on both those situations. And the ADP is different enough that we can grab both running backs without changing the dynamic of our team. That's the key to success, is understanding how to reward yourself if you're wrong by having a backup strategy at the running back position. And I think we've been pretty good at that over the years. It's not that we know, okay, in Carolina, we know who the guy who's getting all the touches are going to be. No, there's three guys there that could be the answer. If we take two of the three, we're in good shape, because we got two chances to be right on that situation. But this data shows you that that theory of looking at running backs very different is a very good idea. So head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. First thing that you need to do is check out all four videos by the professor. And if you have questions, ask the professor,
Yeah.
ask us, and we'll
Yeah.
be glad to go into more detail. But, Professor, this data is showing us some very interesting things, and I think folks can learn from that lesson plan. And head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks. Woo woo.
Holy caramba.
Yeah.
Professor, you have just this is your eureka moment.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So, Dennis, this is uh, right here, the ADP reference class. I put them all in the folder. So,
Yes,
folks,
perfect.
that's where the videos are, and you can take a look at them. I need to. I'll add the actual static figures coming up, but I just wanted to go ahead and do the videos. I probably sound crabby because, I'm one, once I figure it out, I feel like I'm wasting my time talking about it because I'm greedy and I want to know it and I don't really want you to know it, but I am sharing. Dennis makes me share because you just, Dennis, you're a people person more than me. I'm a greedy old dog, and
but
Dennis
but
is
here's
sweet.
but here's the thing, Professor.
Yeah,
We are trying to advance
I know.
the
Keep telling me
science
that.
of what we're doing here. And
Yeah,
but it is the reason why I don't care that
yeah,
our opponents, I don't want our opponents to know all this information, but I
yeah,
know
yeah,
that we need to convince enough people
yeah,
to do their own research,
yeah.
because there are things that we haven't thought about or things that we haven't finished doing yet
Mhm.
that will also yield good information. And we need more science based thinkers in fantasy football. It just, the amount of noise that is made on 400 people putting out their top 15 without anybody talking strategy.
Nope.
This data tells me that I could go into a draft with very poor ideas of who's going to be what, but I can draft according to this data and be successful.
I think you got a shot at beating consensus
I
and
can beat
and being
consensus.
again,
Yeah.
we all agree getting in the playoffs. I mean, we always have the girly moments, that one Kamara week, you can't
Yes.
predict those things. That
But
injury,
but
all you can do is get into we are shooting to get into the playoffs and then let the chips fall. But if we make enough playoffs, we're going to win.
and if we've got a strategy that allows us to weather the injuries
Right.
and changes better,
Yes.
there aren't as many quarterback changes every season other than by injury. You can't predict the injuries.
Right.
There are running back changes that have nothing to do with injuries.
Yes.
Our data is cluing us in to where to look for those. If we draft players, if we don't draft any players, any veteran players
Right.
with an MVP less than 80, we keep them off of our teams, our chance of success just went up, because once those players are gone from the
Right.
draft, we're only taking guys that have upside potential. And we don't care if we're in that white and flopping. We want to catch the 10, 15% that the data shows are hits.
Yep.
But if we take 5 shots at it when everybody else is taking one,
Yep.
our odds are better. Like, knowing this data, Professor, we could take the consensus ADP without any other research and draft a better team with better strategy, better draft strategy. It has nothing to do, but here's the thing, our data is better than consensus.
Yep.
We know that.
Right.
It varies by position, but if we know that we have an edge at quarterback and tight end, for instance, and our strategy gives us an edge at quarterback and tight end, now we just adjust that strategy to say, we don't know what the hell we're doing at running back. Let's just take a lot of them.
I like it.
That's a strategy that pays off, man.
Yep. I'm gonna shut